Today's subject is half fisherman's rib. It's a little used stitch, but it can accomplish great things and make wonderful shapes. These circle sweaters were shaped only with stitch changes. Here's the same design in an adult size, sideways so you can see it. These are all in my More Merry book, and they all use half fisherman's rib. Because that stitch expands so much in width, we can get this. This ear warmer pattern also makes use of half fisherman's rib. The flounces on this doll skirt are achieved using the same technique. The hood of this scootie is wider than the scarf due to the same thing.
You may wonder why this is called half fisherman's rib and what would full fisherman's rib be. Let me explain. First of all, this is normal ribbing, knit one, purl one ribbing that I'm fiddling with. If we change to half fisherman's rib, one bed tucks every other row, and it was this bed. You can tell because its stitches get shorter and wider. The other bed knits every single row. If we were to change to full fisherman's rib, both beds would tuck every other row. So this one would tuck, this one would knit. Then this one would tuck, which it did not in our sample, and this one would knit. And you may wonder, because you've heard you cannot tuck side-by-side stitches, how can that work? It's because of the nature of the rib. Our stitches on any one bed are not really side-by-side. There is a stitch on the alternate bed in between them. Here I was using what we call a 1x1 ribbing setup for both the regular rib and the half fisherman's rib. And while I'm saying that word, let me tell you, it can also be called English rib, and usually is in the Singer Studio manuals, and less frequently it may be called tuck rib. Whatever it is called, either the full needle rib setup with all the needles set to work but racked so that they will alternate, or the 1x1 setup, knit one, purl one setup, which technically, of course, full needle rib is also knit one, purl one, because we're alternating knits and purls. But the regular way that we do garment ribbing is usually with half of the needles out of work on each bed, and then those needles that are in work are racked so that they would oppose if all came out, but since half are out of work, they're evenly alternating, one on one bed, one on the other, one. And that is the setup I used here, but depending on the weight of yarn, fisherman's rib and half fisherman's rib, or if you call it English rib or tuck rib, can be done with either setup. And it can be done on almost any machine with a ribber. You do have to be able to set that machine up so as to knit one row and tuck alternate rows. Half fisherman's rib gets wider than a stockinette fabric would be and shorter, and you can see that fairly well in this cowl because I made the lower edge of the cowl that goes around the neck in plain stockinette, which creates an automatic flare in that direction. Remember, we knitted this direction. Actually, I'm backwards. We knitted this direction, but vertically, well, sideways, so as to be making the cowl around and around the neck. And the net result is, because stockinette rows are longer than half fisherman's rib rows, it flares at the bottom. And also take a look. This is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 16 ribbing stitches. And look how wide it is. This is in worsted weight yarn, but still, that's surprising in a rib stitch because it's much wider than a rib stitch normally is, and also substantially wider than stockinette. So half fisherman's rib gets wider and shorter than you would expect in stockinette. Now let's go look at how to achieve it on several machines. I've been knitting regular ordinary ribbing, so both beds are set to knit normally. I'm about to change to half fisherman's rib. That right there will do the trick. Now the back bed, which is still set like this, is going to knit every row, and this bed will knit every row and tuck alternate rows. Here we go with half fisherman's rib on the brother. This is the 260, but they're all about the same. I've been knitting in normal ribbing with in and in, and I've already changed to the stitch size that I want for half fisherman's rib. All I have to do is this, and now when I knit across, it will start knitting half fisherman's rib. Let's watch. That row, every stitch knitted. That row, every stitch on the main bed knitted, and every stitch on the ribber bed tucked. And that's what we want. Passive is getting some work done, so I can't knit on it for you, but I can show you how we would set it up. As you know, the locks are the same on both beds. So this could be either the front or the back lock. If it were the back lock, I would have it on in. For the front lock, E, X. That's the setting that will make it knit one row and tuck the following row. Actually, you can do the same thing on an E6000, although there are two techniques written into the E6 book that you'll have to look up that also allow you to do it. But you can just ignore the electronics, place the front bed on in and the back on EX, and you will get half fisherman's rib on the E6. Artisans and the Singer Studio line of machines are very, very similar in their setup. This is my main bed we're looking at, and it is set for stockinette and left alone. The ribber, one of these goes to the up position, and this selector goes to the tuck position. That upside down U is the tuck position on this machine. On a Singer or Studio, it's a very similar symbol, and it looks very much like the one for the Superba machine too. It's an upside down U, but the top is flatter. Singer Studio Silver Reed has made so many models throughout the years. They all can be a little bit different, especially the antiques. And I don't have a model set up right now to show you. So you need to look in your manual, and they're almost always listed in that line of machine as English rib. And you will see a setup something like this, really close to this, to guide you. In Singer Studio Silver Reed manuals, this is what the setup instructions will look like. As numbered at the far left, step 1 includes those 6 items, and they are your setup prior to the actual fisherman's rib. Step 2 shows how you change the settings to get knit one row, tuck one row on the ribber carriage. I'll bet you thought that half fisherman's rib was not possible on a single bed machine, and that those of you without ribbers were getting left out, but that is not true. I just made this on this plain single bed machine, but I started with this section that is complete between my thumbs is the same length as this section, which has not been turned into half fisherman's rib. And you can see if I fold it, my finished section looks like about 4 inches shorter than what I knitted. So it is doing that classic thing that we expect half fisherman's rib to do. This edge was not reformed for the purposes of the particular design I'm working on. It's part of the design to leave that alone. What I am going to do is drop every other stitch. For now, I'm just going to drop these 3 because it works better not to get a lot of them undone. That makes for messiness. And I'm going to ladder on down to where we last finished latching up. We're going to do this like reforming any other ribbing almost. There's my spot to ladder down to. Put a weight back on here to keep these stitches out of trouble so they don't jump off while I'm fooling with the others. There's the last stitch that I'm leaving, the top of the tuck rib. We're going to slide the tool behind rung 1, pull through rung 2, and do that all the way up every one of these columns of stitches. And if you watch my videos very often, you've seen me do this before, and you will be saying, hey, wait a minute, that's just tuck rib that you use for trims. And you are right. One of the several but lesser used names for half fisherman's rib is tuck rib. And this is how we create it by hand. The difference is that when we're making a trim, as you've seen me do many times and may have now done yourself many times, we usually just do 2 or possibly 3 columns. In this case, we're going to work across a whole piece of fabric. It goes quite fast. For one thing, we're only actually latching half of the number of stitches that were made, so it cuts the work in half. I don't think that most people would want to do a huge project with manually created half fisherman's rib, but I am making a cowl, and that's not too much to do. And it also depends on your level of dedication. If there's something you're really dying to do, and a ribber is out of the question, you may find it worth the effort. This edge column, well, it's actually the second column from the edge. You would never do the exact edge column. That you see me working on is the most difficult one of the entire project because it is right there on the edge. And now I just pull the last stitch through, hang it back on the needle, and move on to the next ladder, which is already pretty far down. That's as far as we want to go. And I'm not going to do this whole scarf in front of your eyes. I am going to do part of this column so that you can see how much easier the project gets once you're away from the edge. I've got a little bit more to hold on to with my left hand. That makes it nice. And I'm not working a ladder that's been a little bit distorted by having the edge column so nearby. And on up we go. And we'll do that all the way across, except for the last 6 stitches on the right, which are meant to stay stockinette. Of course, that's specific to this project. You might want to do it all the way across something. And I will point out a little something to you. One of the projects that I was thinking that might be a little bit too labor intense was my Doubly Merry pattern, which is a merry-go-round sweater that involves ribbing and half fisherman's rib. However, it might not be all that bad because in the children's sizes there aren't even this many rows, but in the adult sizes, depending what size you make, it's only either 39 or 49 rows of full fisherman's rib, and you are only going to actually half fisherman's rib. I said full, I meant half, sorry. You are only going to have to latch half of that number of rows. Of course, you have to latch stitches all the way across the work, but it wouldn't be that onerous. All right, one thing I want to explain is why it counts and how it's working as half fisherman's rib. If you had 2 beds, one of them, usually the main or the back bed, would be knitting every row. The other one, usually the ribber or front bed, would be knitting every other row and tucking on the rows that it did not knit. So in this case, that's our main bed. And of course, it really did all the knitting. But I am now functioning as the ribber or the front bed. And I am tucking every other row. Watch. Tuck, knit, tuck, knit. So the same exact chore is getting done. We're just approaching it in a different manner. So on across I will go.
Half fisherman's rib is extensively used in my More Merry collection. So now you know how to do it.